The candlelight flickered against the stone walls of Riverrune's inner chamber, shadows dancing like whispers of betrayal. Robb Stark stood silently by the table, staring down at a weathered raven scroll, its broken seal marked with the flaming heart of Stannis Baratheon. His fingers trembled not from fear, but from the weight of the choice he was about to make. He had read the message 3 times already. The offer was clear. An alliance, a secret pact, one built not on affection or shared values, but survival. Robb's war in the south was stalling. The Karstarks were growing restless. The Freys were insulted and unpredictable, and Winterfell, his home, it had fallen. Stannis offered him a path forward, a mutual enemy, the Lannisters. And if they combined their forces, Robb could finally avenge his father and place the North beyond the grasp of southern kings. But it came at a price. He would have to betray the memory of his bannermen who fought for the North's independence. Worse, he'd have to hide the Pact from his mother. Catelyn Stark knocked softly before entering, her eyes weary, her voice hushed. "You haven't slept, Robb." "I'm considering options," he muttered. She glanced at the parchment, narrowing her eyes. "Is that from Dragonstone?" Robb didn't answer. He turned to face her, a quiet fire behind his blue eyes. "How many more men must die for a crown that leaves us bleeding in the mud? Stannis has ships, seasoned knights, and no patience for Lannister games. With him, we have a real chance." Catelyn stepped closer. "He's not Ned. He's not even Robert. That man burns people for gods he barely understands. If you throw in with him, you may win the war, but lose everything else." "I'm already losing everything," Robb said, voice sharp. "Talisa's not safe. Bran and Rickon are gone or worse. The Boltons whisper behind my back, and the Freys count their insult like coin. What choice do I have, Mother?" She reached for his arm but stopped just short. "Don't let grief lead you into fire." But Robb had already decided. 2 nights later, in a secluded glen just west of Riverrun, Robb met the envoy sent by Stannis, a solemn man in dark robes, face worn by sea and sun. With him, a red-robed woman whose eyes glowed like embers. Melisandre of Asshai. "I expected a knight," Robb said coldly. "And I expected a king," Melisandre replied, "but I see a boy dressed in wolfskin." The tension between them crackled, but the envoy handed Robb a scroll Stannis' own signature, promising shared command, joint conquest of King's Landing, and in return, the North's independence under his kingship once the war was won. "You'll betray Renly's death, the Riverlands, and your bannermen," the envoy said, watching. Robb sighed. "I'll do worse if it means my people survive." Melisandre stepped forward, her voice like wind through fire. "The Lord of Light has seen your path, Robb Stark. Shadows follow you. You will suffer, but you will strike down your enemies. If you bend, not break." He didn't know what she meant. Not then. Weeks passed, and the alliance remained a ghost in the mist. Quiet raven flights between Dragonstone and Riverrun, full skirmishes to mask their intent. On the outside, Robb was still the king in the north, but inside, he was preparing for a march toward Blackwater, Bay, not alone, but beside fire and fury. Roose Bolton began asking questions. The Karstarks muttered in their tents. And Walder Frey, ever suspicious, sent word that Robb's promise was wearing thin. Robb didn't care. He had made his pact with fire. Now he only had to pray the flames wouldn't consume him. The night was still when the Raven arrived. Robb sat in the dim torchlight, alone in his war tent, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The letter bore the same mark, the flaming heart, once again from Stannis Baratheon. But this message was different. It carried urgency. King's Landing was weak, Stannis claimed. Tywin Lannister had withdrawn west to crush Robb's movement, leaving the capital poorly defended under the Boy King, Joffrey, and a council of cowards. If they struck now, together, they could end the Lannisters in one savage move. Robb stared long into the flame of the nearby candle. Victory had never seemed so near, or so dangerous. To move now meant breaking his warpath northward, abandoning the defense of the Riverlands, and risking the ire of his bannermen. But more than that, it meant trusting a man as cold and rigid as stone. Behind the tent flaps, Talisa entered quietly. She had never spoken much of war, but her presence soothed him like the words of his late father used to. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind and leaned her cheek against his shoulder. "You've already decided," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "I can't hold the Riverlands, and I can't go back to the north until the Lannisters are broken. If I don't strike now, we'll lose everything. And your mother, she'll never forgive me," he said bitterly. But she understand eventually. The next morning, Robb summoned his lords to the war table. Catelyn stood beside him, her jaw tight, eyes flickering with fear and anger. "We march south," Robb announced, rolling out a rough map of the Crown Lands. "We strike toward King's Landing, fast and quiet. Lord Stannis is preparing his fleet. We will meet him at Wendwater Bay, combine forces, and drive on the city together." There was silence, heavy and cold. Then Lord Rickard Karstark stood up, his voice like gravel. "Stannis, you would have us fight beside a man who murdered his own brother with black magic." Roose Bolton's eyes narrowed. "This is treason against your own claim. You swore us independence. The North shall remain free, so you said." "I still swear it," Robb said firmly. "Stannis has agreed to the North's independence once the war is won." "Agreed," Bolton sneered. "And when has a Baratheon ever honored words not carved in steel?" Robb slammed his fist against the table. "I did not make this decision lightly, but our army is bleeding. The Freys will not support us again, and the Ironborn ravage the coasts. If we don't act now, there will be no North left to free." Karstark spat on the ground. "Your father would have never bent his knee to a southern firelord." "My father is dead," Robb snapped, "because he trusted honor to win against treachery. I will not make the same mistake." There were murmurs, but none dared challenge him openly. Not yet. But the seed was sown. Doubt, anger, resentment. As the northern host began its march south, they moved fast and lean. No banners, no trumpets, just steel and silence. It was a secret war, and one night, under cover of darkness, they met Stannis' army on the shores near Wendwater Bay. Robb dismounted first. His armor was scratched and dull, his eyes hardened beyond his age. Stannis stepped out from his command tent, face gaunt and grim. Behind him stood Seer Davos Seaworth, his loyal Onion Knight, and unmistakable in her red robe-smelly song. There was no handshake, no formal greeting, just a nod. "Your Grace," Stannis said simply. Robb returned it. "Let's win this war." The armies camped close, but uneasy, steel drawn over every word. Northern soldiers watched the flames. That Melisandre lit in the night with growing fear. Some whispered about her red god. Others saw her look too long at Robb, as if she saw something beneath his skin. She visited his tent once and invited. "You dream of wolves," she said, standing in the shadows like a ghost. but fire devours. The forest, you think yourself the North's salvation, yet I see your crown burned red in blood. Robb glared at her. If you came to threaten me, you should have brought an army. She smiled, not kind. I bring truth, and a warning. Don't break your pact. The fire is watching. The next day, scouts returned from the Crown lands with urgent news. Tywin Lannister was marching east again faster than expected. He had learned of the Pact. Somehow, and he was coming with twice the numbers Stannis and Robb had combined. The trap had been sprung. Robb read the scout's words slowly, letting the ink burn into his mind. We've been betrayed, but the question was, ... by who? And more importantly, what would the wolf do now that the lion was closing in? The night was tense, no singing, no laughter, not even the soft murmur of idle speech in the camps. Robb Stark stood on a rise just beyond the tree line, overlooking the smoke trails of cooking fires from both his own men and Stannis's somewhere. Far off in the mist, the Lannister host was moving thousands of boots, armor and death, marching toward them like a golden storm. He turned as Grey Wind approached, the direwolf silent, alert, fur bristling. The wolf had not left his side since the Pact. Animals sensed what men ignored, and lately Grey Wind growled every time Melisandre passed by. Behind him, footsteps crunched over dried leaves. Seer Brynden Blackfish emerged, face lined with experience and suspicion. I've fought in 2 wars, Brynden muttered, but I've never seen one start with so many secrets in the air. Robb didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later that evening, in the hastily built war tent shared by the commanders of both armies, Robb stood across from Stannis and Seer Davos as the map lay unfurled between them. The Lannister host is moving fast, Seer Davos said, pointing with his dagger, faster than expected. Either they've abandoned King's Landing, or they know more than they should. They know, Stannis growled. No force moves. That's swift and less fed by information. Robb met his gaze. You think one of mine betrayed us? Stannis' mouth curled in distaste. Or one of mine? I trust few. You should do the same. Melisandre stepped forward from the shadows. The flames whispered treachery before you crossed the neck. The lion knows of the Pact, but the lion's claws are dull. If we strike him with shadow, Robb stiffened. You're talking about the magic you used on Renly. Davos shifted, uncomfortably. We've no need for that, my lord. Melisandre's eyes burned into Robb's. The Lord of Light offers fire to those who dare grasp it. Would you refuse your only hope because of fear? I fight with men, not shadows. Robb said coldly, use your tricks again, and I'll burn your tent myself. Melisandre did not flinch. The wolf fears fire, but fire remembers. With that, she left, her red robe trailing like a bloody wound. The march resumed at dawn, to armies from the ice of the north, one from the flames of Dragonstone, now moved together, coiling toward the black water like a 2-headed serpent. They kept to the hills and forests, striking down Lannister scouts when possible, but it became clear with each passing hour. Tywin knew exactly where to find them. That night, the Karstarks abandoned camp. Robb stood in the rain, staring at the empty tents. No blood, no struggle, just gone. They never believed in the alliance, Catelyn said behind him, voice hollow. You chose a man they fear over the lords they served beside. You didn't just lose their swords, you've lost their trust. They were waiting for an excuse, Robb muttered, and you gave them one. 2 days later, They met the Lannisters on the banks of the Wendwater. Fog blanketed the earth, turning the battlefield into a ghostly stage. Tywin's banners appeared first, red lions snarling on golden cloth, a sea of steel behind them. Trumpets screamed, horses whinnied. Robb stood with his sword drawn, grey wind at his side. He could see Jane Westerling's brother among the Lannister bannermen, proof that the phrase had turned. He had traded his bride's loyalty for a failed pact, and now the price was about to be collected in blood. Stannis stood beside him, a grim expression painted across his face. "We fight, or we fall." Davos leaned in. "We don't have the numbers, my lords, not anymore." Robb looked out across the battlefield. His mind raced not with fear, but fury. Fury at the betrayal. Fury at his own pride. Fury that this war, which began with his father's death, would end without justice. He raised his sword. "Then let's make the lion bleed before we fall." The first charge was chaos. Arrows rained down like black hail. Robb's horse collapsed beneath him. Grey wind tore through enemy ranks, snarling and rending flesh. The northern men fought like wild animals, years of vengeance pouring from their swords. Stannis' knights moved like iron walls, unrelenting, crushing. But the Lannisters kept coming. More men, more banners, more gold. At the height of battle, a horn sounded from the distant eastern ridge. A third host. Men screamed. Both sides staggered, and from the mists, banners with golden roses emerged. And at their front rode a young king dressed in golden armor, his crown glinting in the Daunterman Baratheon, with Margaery beside him, and a lion's smirk twisting on Seer Jaime's lips. The trap was complete. The alliance had drawn them out, and now they were surrounded. The battlefield was a broken dream of steel and blood. Screams echoed across the valley as northern men died beside Dragonstone knights, surrounded on both sides. Lannister banners flanked them to the west, and now the golden roses of House Tyrell descended from the east like vultures fattened by peace. Robb stood on a mound of corpses, his sword slick with blood, his face smeared with mud and fury. Grey wind stood snarling beside him, arrows piercing his flank, but the beast still fought, still protected. They had been outmaneuvered. They had been betrayed. He scanned the chaos, looking for Stannis, but the King of Dragonstone was already withdrawing. Barking orders, falling back with his remaining men toward the forest line. "They're retreating," shouted Lord Umber, limping up to Robb with blood pouring from his thigh. "The Southrons are running, leaving us to rot." "No," Robb said through clenched teeth. "They were always meant to run. This was the trap." Behind the lines, Catelyn, Stark, and Talisa watched the slaughter from a distant rise, guarded by a handful of archers and riders. Catelyn's face was stone, but her eyes brimmed with horror. "He's surrounded," Talisa said. "We have to do something." "What would you have me do?" Catelyn snapped. "Ride into death with a bow." He chose this path. He made the pact. He walked into fire. Talisa said nothing, but she turned toward the sky and whispered a silent prayer. Catelyn just watched her son disappear into the storm of battle. Her hands trembled, but she would not weep. Not yet. By midday, the North's center had broken. Lannister and Tyrell knights cut through the flanks like scythes through grain. Stannis' rearguard tried to hold the line, but it was clear this was no battle. This was execution. Robb stumbled through the bodies, trying to reach his scattered men. He found Lord Bolton near the base of the hill, bloodied but alive, fighting beside his banner guard. "Pull them back," Robb shouted. "We regroup at the tree line." Bolton looked at him with the coldest eyes Robb had ever seen. Then he gave a nod to his own men. Before Robb could react, one of Bolton's guards lunged forward and drove a blade into Grey Wind's side. The direwolf let out a gurgled snarl, collapsing in the mud. "No," Robb roared, dropping to his knees beside his dying companion. "Your wolf dies first," Bolton said coldly. "Then the rest of your foolish kingdom." More blades came. Robb raised his sword, parried, struck. 2 men fell, but there were too many. Bolton didn't even lift a finger. He just watched. "Why?" Robb gasped, blood pouring down his side. "You broke the North for a southern king. You promised independence. Then you crawled to fire and shadow like a beggar. The North remembers. My king." Then Bolton turned his back and walked away, leaving Robb bleeding in the grass. Hours passed. The battle ended in a massacre. Of the 20,000 northern men who'd marched south, fewer than 2,000 limped away. Stannis had vanished into the forests with his red woman and Seer Davos, leaving Robb to take the fall. The Pact had shattered. At dusk, Robb was found by a pair of Tyrell scouts barely alive, his sword broken, one eye swollen shut. He was dragged before Seer Jaime Lannister, now commanding what remained of the Lannister-Tyrell coalition. Jaime looked down at the young king and shook his head. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Your father had honor. You have desperation." Robb spat blood. "You think this is over? You think the North forgets?" Jaime smiled. "I think the North has already started carving your name into tombstone legends. The boy who would be king. The wolf who struck a deal with fire and got burned." The next day, a raven flew north, carrying a simple message to the last strongholds of Stark loyalists. Robb Stark is defeated, captured. The pact with Stannis is broken. The king in the north bends the knee or dies. In Winterfell, the Ironborn laughed. In the dread fort, Roose Bolton sharpened his knives. And far beyond the wall, where winter whispered through the trees, a boy with no name dreamed of wolves and blood. The raven reached the north just as the first snowflakes began to fall. At Deepwood Motte, Lady Mage Mormont read the message once, then crushed it in her fist. "Captured," she growled. "The king in the north does not get captured. He dies fighting or not at all." At White Harbour, Lord Wyman Manderley sat in silence, rereading the words, his great belly shaking with rage. "Stannis, that miserable southerner, I told him. We all told him." He slammed a fist on the table. "He made a pact with fire and burned our trust to ash." And at the dread fort, Roose Bolton read the message with something colder than joy, satisfaction, calculation. "So it begins," he said, setting the parchment down. "The North has no king, only corpses and whispers." His bastard son, Ramsay, grinned beside him. "May I flay him, father, when they send him back?" Roose didn't answer. He already had a reply in mind. In the Riverlands, word travelled slower along torn roads and blood-soaked fields. The Freys laughed, pouring wine, already rewriting their version of the tale. "He betrayed our daughter," Lord Walder spat, "broke the pact, shamed the house, and made a fool's deal with the fire god. What did he think would happen?" His sons chuckled, but behind their eyes there was unease. They had been promised revenge, but not like this. Robb's fall was too clean, too convenient, and most of all, too public. "I want him dead," Walder said, "but slowly. Send a raven to King's Landing. Tell them we'll hold him at the Twins." and feed him to the crows. In the dungeons beneath Highgarden, Robb Stark lay chained in a stone cell, light barely touching the floor. His wounds festered, his thoughts circled endlessly. He had trusted too much. He had listened to promises made in fire and ignored the cold truth of the North. The Freys had waited, the Boltons had watched, and when he reached for victory, they cut out his legs. Talisa. Was she alive? His mother, was she safe? He wanted to scream, but wolves don't beg. He waited until one night the cell door opened. Sir Jaime Lannister entered, flanked by 2 Tyrell guards. "Your lucky Lady Margaery has a soft heart," Jaime said. "She thinks we should keep you alive as a token of peace, a gesture. But I told her." He knelt beside Robb's voice. "Low, wolves bite, even when cornered. Sooner or later, someone's going to put you down." Robb met his eyes. "Kill me, then. Or are you still playing the hero?" Jaime stood. "You're not worth the sword swing." As he left, Robb spoke the words that haunted Jaime for nights after. "I wonder what your sister thinks about me still breathing." In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister sat beside the Iron Throne, wine in hand, reading the reports from Highgarden. "Robb Stark alive. Captured," she scoffed. "The wolf cub should have died like the rest." Grand Maester Pycelle shifted nervously. "It could be used as a tool, a display of mercy. The crown is weak, and I don't care about mercy," Cersei snapped. "I care about legacy. Let the North see their king rotting in chains. Let the Freys cut him into pieces and send a finger to every village from White Harbor to Last Hearth." But not all on the small council agreed. Olenna Tyrell, sharp-eyed and silent, said nothing until everyone else had spoken. Then she leaned forward. "You don't kill a symbol, Cersei. You use it. We make the wolf bow to the lion, and when he does, the rest will follow." Cersei narrowed her eyes. "He'll never kneel." "Then we break his legs," Alina said simply, "and he'll kneel anyway." Meanwhile, somewhere in the Westerlands, Catelyn Stark rode in secret. Cloaked, broken, but not beaten. She had escaped the field. Talisa was with her, her face pale but her spirit stronger than ever. "We go north," Catelyn whispered. "We rally what's left, the Mormonts to anyone who still remembers what it meant to be loyal." "And then?" Talisa asked. "We make them pay," Catelyn said, teeth clenched. "For the Karstarks, for the Boltons, for the Freys, for every man who smiled while my son was hunted. Like a dog, her eyes burned. Fire betrayed us. But the North remembers." In the haunted woods of the North, a figure watched the stars, eyes distant and strange. His skin was pale, touched by the old magic. His dreams were filled with wings and whispers. Bran Stark had seen it all. His brother's rise, his fall, the secret pact, the burning shadows, the betrayal, but the vision was not over. He had seen a future to one not yet written, and in it Robb Stark still wore a crown, but not on his head. On a spike, the cell stank of rot and wet stone. Robb Stark barely moved any more. His body, once full of fire and purpose, was now riddled with infection and bruises, his chains cold against his wrists and ankles. Time had become meaningless in this dark hole beneath Highgarden. He no longer counted days, he only measured silence. Every so often, a guard would bring him stale bread and water. Sometimes, Jaime Lannister would stop by, not to speak, but simply to look, as if trying to understand how the wolf had fallen so far. Other times, ravens would come and go, and Robb knew his fate was being debated like a game piece. What none of them knew was that something inside him had changed. He had stopped hoping for rescue. Now he wanted revenge. Far to the north, past the Neck and over the frost-hardened hills of the true north, Lady Mage Mormont had begun gathering forces. Her banners were few tattered remnants of shattered alliances, but her voice was thunder. House Glover sent what they could. House Hornwood, hesitant but vengeful, answered to. Even some deserters from House Reed crept out of the swamps. And with them rode Catelyn Stark, her eyes cold, her purpose clear. She stood before the campfire one night, looking into the flames, her fingers gripping the pommel of her dagger. "He's not dead," she said, to no one in particular. "They won't kill him, not yet." Mage spat into the fire. "Lions are arrogant. They like trophies. They'll use him," Catelyn continued. "Parade him before the north, make us bow. But they've forgotten who we are. We are not southern lords. We do not kneel to gold. We kneel to blood." She looked around at the gathered lords and soldiers, their faces drawn, their eyes searching for something to believe in. "They think Robb's fall broke us. But all it did was remind us who the enemy is." A roar of agreement rose around her. It wasn't an army yet, but it was becoming one. In High Garden, the politicking continued. Alina Tyrell met privately, with Jaime Lannister in her garden, away from ears and ravens. "He's weak," Jaime said, "but not broken." "Good," Elena replied. "A broken man is of no use to anyone, but a humiliated king." She smiled. "That is a symbol. You really believe parading him through the north will tame it?" Jaime asked. "No," Helena said, "but it will divide it. Make his remaining allies question whether they followed a boy king or a fool. And if it doesn't work, then we hang him from the walls of Harrenhal and send pieces to every rebellious house." But not everyone agreed. Seer Davos, Seaworth, who had tracked Stannis back to Dragonstone after their humiliating retreat, stood in the dim hall beside his king, voice hard with frustration. "You left him to die," he growled. "Robb Stark fought beside you, and you abandoned him in the mud." Stannis stood unmoved. He lost, and he betrayed himself long before the battle. "You think I enjoy it? I gave him a chance. He squandered it on pride and false hopes." Davos stepped forward. "And what happens when the North unites around his suffering? You didn't just betray a boy, you betrayed an idea." Melisandre, standing behind them, watched silently, her red eyes unblinking. "The boy is not dead," she said softly. "The flames have not shown his end, but they do show blood. Wolves, snow, and fire." Stannis narrowed his eyes. "Speak clearly, woman." Melisandre only smiled. "You abandoned a king, but the gods have not." That night, in the darkness of his cell, Robb dreamt again. But this time, it wasn't just dreams. He saw his father's face, not noble, not proud, but bleeding on the executioner's block. He saw Bran standing among white trees, eyes glowing like ice. He saw his mother riding through snow, a knife in her hand, and then he saw himself crowned in ash, standing before a twisted throne, not of iron, but of bone and flame. When he woke, the chains felt looser. Something was happening, inside him, or around him. 3 days later, a letter arrived at King's Landing, and from there to Highgarden. Signed with a blood-red hand, Roose Bolton had claimed the North. He had taken Winterfell in the name of the Iron Throne. The bastard of the Dreadfort was now Warden of the North, and in exchange he offered a gift. The king in the North belongs in the North, The letter read, "Send him to me, and I will show the realm what happens to false kings." Jaime read the letter, then passed it to Olenna. Robb was being passed like meat at a lion's feast. But wolves don't die quietly, and Robb Stark was no longer just a boy with a crown. He was becoming something else, something colder, something far more dangerous. The wagon rolled through the King's Road under heavy guard, covered by black cloth and silence. Chained at wrists and ankles, Robb Stark lay still beneath the shroud, barely recognizable from the boy who once rallied thousands to war. His hair had grown long and matted. His wounds had scabbed over, some festering still. Yet it was his eyes that had changed most. They no longer burned with fire, but glinted with something colder, something waiting. 2 Lannister knights flanked the wagon front and rear. Tyrell riders kept to the flanks, their banners lowered, their eyes wary. Everyone knew what they were carrying, and everyone knew who awaited them at journey's end. Roose Bolton, Lord of the Dreadfort, Warden of the North. Atop Winterfell's walls, Roose read the incoming raven with a grim smirk. "They're sending him," he said aloud, "the last wolf, and they expect gratitude." He looked down at Ramsay, who crouched over a freshly flayed corpse near the kennels, humming as he peeled skin from muscle with precise joy. "I want him alive," Roose said. "For now." Ramsay stood, blood up to his elbows. "Can I play with him first?" "Eventually," Roose said coolly, "but only once the North sees him kneel. Then we hang his banners upside down." Ramsay giggled. "We skin his wolf. We make him beg for. We make the North believe he's broken," Roose interrupted. "Then we watch it break too." Back on the road, Robb stirred in the darkness of the wagon. He had heard whispers through the canvas. He knew where they were taking him. The Boltons had always slithered like snakes through the northern snow, hiding their knives behind cold words and false loyalty. But Robb had changed since the battle. He no longer believed in honor. He no longer sought justice. Now, all he wanted was vengeance. And vengeance, unlike justice, didn't care if you crawled or bled to reach it. Meanwhile, in the far north, Catelyn Stark stood in the ruined halls of an abandoned keep, staring down at a map littered with candles and ink. "They're sending him to Roose Bolton," said Mage Mormont grimly. "We can try and intercept." "No," Catelyn said. "We won't reach him in time." Talisa stepped forward. "Then what do we do?" Catelyn looked up, her eyes burning like frost-bitten steel. "We let the North see the Boltons for what they are. We let them see what happens to Starks under false kings, and when the time comes..." She dragged her knife across the parchment, slicing Winterfell in two. "We take it back." When the wagon reached the gates of Winterfell, the sky was grey with ash and snow. The great courtyard had been rebuilt under Bolton rule, but it felt wrong. The stones were clean, but the air stank of fear. The weirwood tree in the God's wood was stripped of its face, and the kennels echoed with the howls of starving hounds. Robb was pulled from the wagon in chains, flanked by dozens of archers. Ramsay greeted him with a too-wide grin, dressed in fine leathers, his hair neatly combed. "The king in the north returns," he sang mockingly. "You'll find things have changed while you were away." Robb didn't respond. He simply looked past Ramsay toward the broken walls of Winterfell, home desecrated, defiled, the memory of Bran, of Rickon, of his father's voice calling across the yard flooded him. But he did not cry. He had no more tears left to offer this world. Roose approached slowly, draped in black furs, his face a mask of calculated indifference. "You look older," he said. "I was a king," Robb replied. "Kings age fast." Roose nodded. "So you were." He gestured to the gallows erected in the courtyard. "You'll stand before the people tomorrow. You'll confess your crimes. You'll kneel before me and the Iron Throne's justice, and you will renounce your name. Do that, and I may let you live." Robb stared at him. "And if I don't?" Roose leaned in close. "Then your mother will receive your skin sewn into a banner, and the North will hang it beside mine." That night, locked in a dark cell beneath Winterfell, Robb waited. He replayed every betrayal, every scream of the men who died for him, the look on Grey Wind's face when he fell, and when he closed his eyes, he saw Bran again, not as a boy, but as something else. Pale, watching. A whisper came in the cold. "Winter is not done with you, Robb." And somewhere beyond the wall, the dead stirred. The sun never rose over Winterfell. That morning only a dim grey light filtered through thick clouds, as if the gods themselves refused to witness what was about to unfold. In the courtyard, the Bolton soldiers formed a silent ring, grim-faced and armed. Banners bearing the flayed man fluttered on the wind, red and cruel. In the centre stood the gallows, freshly built, with still pale and raw like stripped flesh. Atop the scaffold stood Robb Stark, battered but unbowed, his wrists chained in front of him. He was wrapped in a torn fur cloak, his crown gone, but his eyes, those eyes still belonged to a king. Roose Bolton approached, cold and methodical as ever. Ramsay stood off to the side, giggling quietly, stroking the head of a snarling hound, as if he were petting a lover. A hush fell over the gathered men. Roose's voice rang out. "Robb Stark, you were brought here to confess your crimes. You broke your oath to the Iron Throne. You betrayed your bannermen. You allied with the enemy, with sorcery, with shadow and flame. You spilled northern blood for southern dreams." Robb said nothing. Roose continued. "Renounce your claim. Renounce your name, and you may leave this place alive." The crowd waited. Some eyes were wide with hatred, others with shame. Then Robb raised his head, slowly, and he laughed. It was a low, rasping sound, but it cut through the air like a blade. "You think this ends with me," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "You think the North will forget," Ramsay barked. A laugh. "It already has." Robb turned toward the crowd. "My name is Robb Stark, son of Eddard Stark, king in the North. You may chain me, beat me, kill me, but the North remembers, and one day wolves will feast on your bones." He turned his eyes to Roose. "And you'll choke on your own son's madness." Roose's face did not change, but he gave a curt nod. The executioner stepped forward. Robb knelt, slowly, deliberately, but not in surrender, in defiance. As the sword rose, a horn blew in the distance. Then another, a third. Shouts echoed across the walls. Then flames outside the gates. The North had come. Lady Mage Mormont led the first charge, her war cry tearing through the cold like a bear's roar. Catelyn rode beside her, cloaked in grey, a dagger in one hand, fury in the other. Talisa, armoured and fierce, led a pack of archers who rained fire on the outer walls. The Mandalese came from the south, the Glovers from the west. Dozens of forgotten banners rose again, not for politics, not for power, but for vengeance. Winterfell was under siege. Inside the walls, chaos erupted. The execution was abandoned. The crowd scattered. Ramsay screamed for his dogs, but even they seemed unsettled by the smell in the wind. Roose moved fast, pulling back toward the great hall. Robb stood, unchained now, a guard slain at his feet, sword in hand. His face bled, but he moved like a man possessed. He found Ramsay first. The bastard tried to run. He didn't get far. Grey Wind may have died, but wolves never hunt alone. Robb's blade sank into Ramsay's chest as the bastard begged, his mouth full of blood and disbelief. This is for Grey Wind. Another thrust. For Bran. Another. For the north. And when Ramsay finally stopped screaming, Robb stood over him, covered in blood, shaking. In the halls, Roose fought like a man trying to preserve something already rotting. But there was no saving it. He was cornered by Catelyn herself. She didn't say a word. She just watched as Talisa put a knife through his throat. Then together, they dragged his body through the snow and fed it to the dogs Ramsay left behind. By nightfall, the fires burned low. The snow began to fall again. The banners of House Stark were raised over Winterfell, and for the first time in years, the north belonged to wolves again. Robb sat in the godswood, where the old face of the weirwood tree had been carved anew, fierce, mournful, and red as blood. He knelt before it, alone, sword across his lap. Catelyn joined him quietly. "You're still alive," she said. "Not the same," he replied. "No," she whispered. "None of us are." They stayed there in silence as the wind blew softly through the trees. Far to the south, in King's Landing, Cersei read the Raven with shaking hands. Winterfell has fallen. The Boltons are dead. Robb Stark lives. She crushed the scroll. "Let them freeze," she spat. But in her heart she felt it too. The cold had returned, and the north was not finished. Not yet.